Hello, I'm Morris Kochanski, Wilderness Living Skills and Survival Instructor. Might also throw in um, outdoor educator and whatever. When I first started in this issue of developing an inclination to make a living as a survival instructor, there was no school that you could go to get your qualifications. Basically, you knocked about in the area until finally you felt you had enough knowledge and enough confidence to say you could teach survival, and basically that's the point at which your true education began. Now, when you're trying to determine or define survival, you find that even today a lot of people make assumptions and presuppositions and so on. And there are many things that are often taught on survival courses that probably are not very much use to you when you're engaged in an actual survival situation. Baskets or basketry is an activity that seems to be enjoyed by a lot of people. And when I would teach a survival course, and if I attempted to show a basket, you found that the students were quite receptive, because they figure, well, surely you got to carry stuff in a basket, you got to pick berries, on and on, so it'd be useful to be skilled in basket making. Well, no good fairy hits you on the head with a willow wand and all of a sudden you can make functional baskets. I have here baskets that I have personally made in the past. I used to teach at the university level, and I used to teach a course called Primitive Pioneering and Natural Crafting. And that's where stuff like this fit the bill, but it was sort of not really included in the issue of survival knowledge. I'm still in the process of defining survival in a way where when its pen is put to paper, that people will say, hey, there's some value to defining the issue so that we cut to the chase and learn the things that we really know. And when someone endures a survival episode, they have the cause to either bless you or curse you, depending on how much how comfortable they are in the issue of survival. The first basket I learned how to weave because I had the good fortune to acquire handmade willow baskets when I was still in high school. And when I saw that they were naturally made, I acquired them because I thought that sometime in the future we would likely sit down and learn how to weave these things should you need them, because at the time you figured it was relevant and important to know these things in survival. But this is a willow basket. It can be woven out of many thin things. So willow in this case is of the salix. Could make these even better if this were made out of red osier dogwood. As red osier dogwood, as it cures, becomes almost hard like iron. So it produces a very flexible material when it's fresh, but it dries into a very hard material. But this basket of this nature doesn't really have a rim, and all of the ribs and the rim and the rim stick, you may pre-dry them. That's the best way to go, although in a pinch you could, if you're experienced enough, you can work with fresh stuff, but it wants to spring apart on you, and it'll end up creating less uniformity, more distortion, more misshapen. So if you take a form and you put all your materials in like a pail, a 5-gallon pail is a nice start, and everything dries that way, and after it's thoroughly dry you take it out, and the hoops and the ribs are there. The situation is that to make the rim you just go around it and off you go, as opposed to some of the fancy rims that I never really mastered them. For example, the rim on this birch bark, this isn't a basket because it's folded out of, it should be called a bucket. But anyway, this was the first attempts at weaving, and so there is a considerable detail in bushcraft on this construction. This very same, except the basket there was larger and didn't have the handle. The next one was probably, it was the birch bark, folding bark. Now, I did a tremendous amount of research in the chapter on birch bark and work with birch bark. I am arrogant enough to say that maybe I should have deserved a PhD in the research that I did in this type of artifact that was predominantly, played a big part in the role of the Aboriginal peoples. It may take a considerable, probably a 25-page essay to discuss all the things, the folds and how they are done, the reinforcing, the tendency for birch bark to tear very easily in line with the lenticels, and the type of stitching here, which you might initially think has got something to do with decoration, but it's actually got a lot to do with preventing the issue of going to a lot of work, and the next thing you know, you got the rim in one hand and the rest of the basket in the other. So you got to stagger your stitching and to make it look regular. Needless to say, this basket began to develop in its present appearance probably after years of working with birch bark and spruce roots. These are probably tamarack roots and so on. Now, if you make a basket like this that's very hard and solid, it'll last hundreds of years probably. If it's noodly and very flexible, it does not last very long. But there are baskets that you make in an instant, and probably after a few days' use, you might choose to use it for kindling and so on. But it takes considerable technical ability to master all of the things that you want to learn to be successful in producing. This basket is well traveled. My wife, who has a lot of relatives in the United Kingdom, when she went on a tour there, she had about a dozen people she'd like to give gifts to. So I made a dozen baskets that sort of fit into each other for compact luggage, and she couldn't find the relative that this one was destined to, so she brought it back. So it ended up being fortuitous, because almost every baskets that I have ever woven, I have not been able to keep them, because they end up either as wedding presents or birthday presents or some other cause. Now, the next basket is made out of black spruce. Now, black spruce is a splintable material. So let's say you get a stick about the size of a hockey stick handle, and it would say that the straight part. If you had a piece of black spruce of those dimensions as a hockey stick handle, you might just about weave a basket this size out of that one piece of wood, because you can split it and split it and split it. And you have to stop splitting it at a certain point, because you could have split it once again and this would have been like paper, therefore it wouldn't have very much durability. When I made this basket, I did not know how to make this rim. I'll talk about that in a moment. And so the rim that I came up with was one where you've got an outside part that resists being stretched, and an inside part that compresses, and then you make a filling in there, and periodically you stitch it in place, and this is what you get. And the diagonal weave, which is described in bushcraft, is the easiest way for you to form the basket. Now, to form the basket this way, the fact that you've got the bottom and then you put a going on there is almost an insurmountable challenge for some people. They get driven to severe distraction. But this method of making the basket leaves you with a situation where you create a rim by folding in and out and so on. And I learned this method in Sweden. I went there once to attend a certain event, and there was a Finnish basket weaver that used this technique. And he would make baskets so big that 3 or 4 people would stand in it, and you could lift it. It was the baskets for hauling hay. But in Sweden there are pine trees, that you're sitting here and there's these trees that probably have been planted and replanted for many generations, and you go a long way up before you see the first branch. And the very first, if you want to weave a basket, you take the closest tree, fell it, and you can proceed to splint it. Well, I had spent a long time teaching myself to do this, and when I saw that workshop, I started to participate, and the guy who ran it saw that I seemed to know something about, because I was very adept at, when I saw that splintable material, man, it was superior. It was easier to work than the black spruce. Black spruce was a challenge. And so I proceeded, and then when it came to the rim, I hadn't been paying attention, and I started to make, spin it this way, and he couldn't speak English. It ended up being that a nearby person that could speak English and Finnish, she became sort of our interpreter. And first thing he says, when you make the basket that way, how the hell do you finish the rim? He said, well, he wasn't familiar with this method that I was using anyway, so whatever. But then I saw that his method, which is quite intriguing, this might look like you bend it and tuck it. No, you don't. There's a kind of a weaving process that goes around and so on. But anyway, it's a funny thing. The method of making that rim, I have yet to find that described here in North America. I've looked and looked, and there's no one explains this method, you might say. But anyway, it's easy enough to find birch, neither too thick nor too thin. Too thin, it doesn't work. Too thick, you learn that there's always a lot of that you've got to work on getting it right for what you're up to. Too thick, and you have difficulty bending. Too thin, and the basket is sloppy, and it doesn't have any rigidity, and so on. So this method would have been very applicable, but when I built this basket, I didn't know this method. I have since built these, and if I'd been conservative, I tend to use the type of cardboard that you find in cereal boxes and so on, and you can weave baskets like you wouldn't believe using that. After all, that paper is a product of the forest, and if you master your weaving like this using that type of cardboard, then you can use like 3 or 4 layers of the cardboard if you're not happy with the thickness. But at the end, you could probably produce a pack basket that, if you use the right kind of latex paint or whatever, probably that basket would be just about as durable as anything made out of other material. So my idea is you learn and train on that, because it's readily available, it's inexpensive, and you can learn in the basement, a scout troop, girl guide troop, and whatever. And then one day you might be so fortunate that you'll be able to fell an appropriate black spruce and splint it, and you right away would be able to build it because you learned how to do it with cardboard. So I have found that this type of crafting that you see here is very good for the soul. It's the idea that you walk off into this forest, and a few hours later you walk out with one of these. A lot of people say, wow, you really know how to interrelate with the bush. And so your credibility soars when people see that you can take the stuff that grows around us and convert it into something functional, attractive, and maybe even artistic sometimes. So on.